Welcome to Whispers of Asia, a place where forgotten rituals breathe through incense smoke and old gods stir in the soil beneath your feet. Here, every whisper is a warning, every silence a scream held in reverence. Our stories are not written in ink, but in ash, in bone, and in memory. Tonight, we bring you a tale from the mist-veiled highlands of Northern Thailand, where grief is not just mourned, it is fed. A story buried in red clay and sacred chants, of a woman who dared to whisper her longing to the dead, and heard them whisper back. This is The Teeth Beneath, a tale from the Temple of Smiling Soil. Lean in and listen closely, because once the earth begins to smile, it never stops. The sky had been gray for 7 days. In the hills of Chiang Rai, nestled beyond the rice paddies and tamarind trees, there was a silence so deep it clung to your skin like humidity. The villagers called it a morning wind, when the clouds hung too low and the rain refused to fall, when even the birds didn't sing. Nietzsche didn't remember hearing her own breath since the morning they pulled her husband's body from the river. He had gone fishing, as he always did, quietly, gently, without complaint. That was his way. But when the sun rose too high and the dogs howled at the banks, they found him floating near the reeds, eyes open, mouth parted, as if he had been about to say something. He never said it. They burned his body behind the house as tradition dictated. She sat before the fire, silent and still, watching his shape collapse into orange light. She never screamed. She didn't weep. She just breathed slowly, counting each inhale like it was all that kept her here. It was the monk who came to her that night. Brakom was a thin, worn man who walked like someone who had buried more than his share of people. He said nothing when he arrived, just sat beside her, staring into the dark as if waiting for it to move. After a long silence, he spoke. "There is a temple," he said, voice like wet bark. "Far into the clay hills, it remembers the names of the dead." Nietzsche turned to him. Her face, pale from days without food, barely moved, but her eyes held something, a flicker, a hunger beneath the grief. "The temple?" she whispered. Brakom nodded. "Wat Din Yim," he said, "the temple of smiling soil." The next morning, Nietzsche packed nothing. She left her home as it was, the ashes of her husband cold in a jar, the bowls still on the table, his slippers by the door. She walked barefoot, taking only a thin scarf and the old photograph he'd once tucked into her rice basket, the one where he smiled too wide as if unsure how to hold his joy. The forest swallowed her within hours. There were no clear paths to the temple, only broken trails and overgrown roots, moss-covered stones that looked too much like kneeling figures. Birds called overhead, then fell silent when she passed. By dusk, she saw it. Wat Din Yim wasn't much to look at, just a sunken structure of rotting teak and crumbling stucco, half-eaten by vines. Clay statues surrounded it, dozens, maybe hundreds, each carved into the shape of a seated figure, mouths stretched in silent smiles. Not joyful smiles, no. These were the kind that sat too long on the face, the kind that twitched if you stared too long. The monk was already there. Brakom swept the clay steps with a handmade broom, his saffron robes dulled by years of dust. He didn't look up as she approached. "You heard the soil calling then," he murmured. "I didn't know it was calling," she replied. "It always is," he said, "but only the grieving can hear it." Inside the temple, the air was thick with incense and mold. The walls sweated, the floor sagged in places, but the altar stood untouched, a small stone slab, stained red from generations of offerings. At its base, a shallow bowl of sticky rice, and beside it, a single blackened tooth. Nietzsche didn't ask. She just sat down. That night, she lay on the temple's wooden floor, listening. No crickets, no owls, only the faint rustling of leaves beyond the open window. And something else. A sound beneath the floorboards, a wet, slow breath. She closed her eyes and let it wrap around her. In her dream, her husband stood by the river. He didn't speak. He didn't move, but his mouth was open as it had been when they found him, open and smiling. "Why are you smiling?" she asked, but he only looked at her, that same expression stretched wide as if held there by something underneath the skin. She woke with her fingers buried in the clay floor, nails cracked, her palms bleeding. At dawn, Bracom offered her tea. "You dreamed," he said without asking. "He smiled," she replied, voice hoarse. But it wasn't his smile. The monk sat beside her, nodding. "That's how it begins." "What is this place?" she asked finally. He looked toward the soil outside, where the statues sat in rows like mourners at a funeral no one had the heart to finish. "This is a place where grief has teeth," he said, "and the soil remembers every name whispered into it." "Can I speak his name here?" Bracom didn't answer. He only handed her a rice bowl. "Not yet," he said. "The soil must be fed first." That evening, Nietzsche wandered among the statues, each one different, some chipped, some half swallowed by vines, some grinning with such unsettling precision she had to look away. They circled the temple like guardians or prisoners. At the edge of the clearing, she found a smaller statue, barely knee-high, its mouth curved into a crooked smile. Beneath it, the clay had cracked open. She bent down and placed a pinch of sticky rice into the crevice. The earth made no sound, but as she stood, she felt it. The breath again, closer now, hungrier. And when she turned to go, the statue was smiling wider than before. She didn't sleep that night. She sat before the altar, staring at the bowl of rice left untouched. But in the morning, the bowl was empty, and in its place, 2 teeth. Not her husband's, not hers, but still familiar. The wind changed. The morning wind, the villagers called it. But here in the temple, it was something else. It didn't mourn. It remembered. And Nietzsche, once a grieving widow, now sat in the center of it, soil clinging to her hands, teeth in her rice bowl, and a name on her lips she was too afraid to speak. Yet Nietzsche stayed, not out of belief, not yet, but out of something quieter, something heavier. There are griefs that weep and scream, and there are griefs that go still, like water pulled down by its own depth. She belonged to the second kind now. Each morning she woke on the hard wood of the temple floor, her spine aching, the scent of old incense clinging to her skin. The silence was no longer empty. It was listening. Prahom moved through the temple grounds like a shadow. He didn't ask why she remained. He didn't tell her to leave. Instead, he gave her tasks. Sweep the cracked tiles. Wipe the ash from the altar. Burn offerings to the unseen. She did them all, and never once did he ask her husband's name. It was on the 5th morning that she followed him deeper into the trees. Behind the temple was a hidden path, not marked, not maintained. The foliage grew in crooked patterns, the air thicker somehow. Ferns curled unnaturally. The clay underfoot stuck to her heels like it wanted to hold her there. They stopped at a clearing, circular and sunken, and it smiled. Hundreds of clay statues ringed the space, seated cross-legged in a perfect circle, mouths wide, grins stretched unnaturally across their faces. Their eyes were closed, their hands rested on their knees, palms up, waiting. The smiles disturbed her more than anything she'd seen since coming here. They were not joyful. They were forced, as if molded by hands that misunderstood what happiness meant. "Why do they smile?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. Prahom didn't answer. He knelt before one of the figures and placed a handful of sticky rice into its upturned palm. "Each one remembers a soul," he said softly, "fed by those who couldn't let go." "You mean people come here to feed these things?" "Not anymore. Most have died or forgotten the way." She looked around at the expressions. "Are they real?" "They were once," he said. "Now they are only echoes. Clay holds memory better than flesh." That night she couldn't sleep, not because of the silence, but because of the way the statues had seemed to turn toward her as she left, as if recognizing her, as if waiting. The temple groaned as it settled. The clay beneath the floor creaked like an old mouth opening in slow hunger. She sat up. The altar was dark. The bowl from the night before still sat there, empty now, save for another tooth, small, childlike. She didn't scream, didn't move. She only whispered, so softly she wasn't sure if the air even carried it. Anan, her husband's name. The walls didn't react, the shadows didn't shift, but something in the floor breathed out, a warm, damp exhale, like soil letting go of memory. The next morning, she returned to the clearing alone. The path felt different now, as if it welcomed her. The trees bent subtly inward, and the wind moved only behind her, never ahead. When she reached the circle of statues, she stood before the smallest one. Its mouth was chipped, its smile a little off-center, like someone who had forgotten how to smile but tried anyway. She sat down cross-legged in front of it and waited. She remembered the day she met Anand. It had been during the mango harvest. She was 16, fierce and quick-tongued. He had been shy, taller than most boys, with hands that trembled when he passed her water. They barely spoke, but she noticed the way he glanced at her when he thought she wasn't looking. They married a year later. He wasn't rich, not strong, but kind, quiet. The kind of man who remembered how she liked her rice, soft on the edges, never dry. And now he was gone, and she had never told him that she liked the way his laughter crinkled at the edges, or that she wanted to name their daughter Dao, even though she had never told him she was pregnant before she lost it. She opened her palm and placed the memory
on the soil. Prahom found her there hours later, still sitting, her eyes closed, her hand in the clay. "You fed it," he said quietly. "A memory," she whispered. "It is enough for now." He knelt beside her, looked down at the small statue. Not all ghosts scream when they return. Some just smile. That night, the temple didn't breathe. It whispered, just once, a low syllable too quiet to name, but enough to make her blood pause in her veins. She opened her eyes to darkness, total. She could not see her own hand, could not see the altar. And then she saw a shape, not walking, not floating, just there. At the edge of the dark, barely defined, but the shape of shoulders, of a neck bent at the wrong angle, a mouth that twitched like wet cloth. She didn't move, the figure didn't move, but the smile widened, and behind that smile, something darker grinned with it. In the morning, she had no memory of going to sleep, but her hands were caked in red clay, and her scarf, the one she brought from home, was folded beside her with a single wet footprint atop it. Size, exactly his. She confronted Prahom. "He came last night. I saw him." The monk said nothing for a long time. Then finally, "You broke the rule." "What rule?" "The soil listens to grief, but it does not forget the mouth it feeds from." "I just wanted to see him," she whispered. "One more time." "One is all it gives. Feed it again, and it may expect more. And when the soil expects, it takes." She clenched her fists. Why would a temple be built on such a place? Prahom looked toward the trees. Because there are some places too sacred to bury, and some hungers too old to starve. That evening, she stared at the clay bowl in front of the altar. Empty. Waiting. She placed a new offering, rice, salted fish, and a single mango slice. A taste of memory. She stepped back, waited. The wind didn't blow, the insects didn't sing, but the bowl emptied, without touch, without movement, just gone. And in its place, a smile drawn in the clay beneath it, with too many teeth.
The villagers never spoke of the temple, not out loud. When Prahom walked through town to gather dried herbs or incense, people averted their gaze. Some muttered brief prayers under their breath. Others made small signs with their fingers, not blessings, but protections. No one asked about the woman who now lived in the hills, but they whispered about her. They said she had clay beneath her nails now, that she talked to statues in her sleep, that the wind around her house no longer sounded right. They said she had fed the forgotten. Nietzsche had begun to feel it, the difference. The temple no longer felt abandoned, not truly. Something moved there now, just beneath the surface. It wasn't visible, it wasn't loud, but it was always there, like a second breath inside her own. She swept the floors each morning, not to clean, but to make noise, to remind herself that she was still the one alive. But the soil remembered, and the smiles were widening. One morning, a boy from the village came up the hill, barefoot, alone, no more than 12. He carried a small bundle of banana leaves, tied with twine, pressed tightly to his chest. Nietzsche met him at the gate. He didn't speak, just looked at her with wide, dark eyes, the kind that had seen death too soon and grown quiet in its shadow. She nodded and let him pass. He walked directly to the altar. Kneeling, the boy placed the bundle on the stone slab. Inside, a few coins, a lock of hair, and a paper talisman painted with red ink. A name was written across the parchment, "My Jam," his mother. He whispered it once, then he left, didn't look back. That night, the altar remained untouched. The bundle stayed sealed, but the bowl beneath it, emptied. And when Nietzsche went to clean it at dawn, the coins were gone. The hair remained, and in its place, a shard of fingernail, tiny, curved, red at the root. She buried it, quietly. Procombe noticed the change before she said anything. "You opened the door wider," he said. "It is not yours to open." "I didn't ask him to come," she replied. "No," the monk agreed, "but grief spreads like fire, and once it knows where to burn, others follow the smoke." She hesitated. "What happens if too many feed it?" He looked toward the earth and didn't answer. The villagers began arriving one by one, never in groups, always silent. They came before dawn or just after dusk, never speaking more than a few words, always with offerings, rice, teeth, bits of cloth, names. Some came trembling, others came with dry eyes and heavy shoulders. All of them left lighter and a little more hollow. The smiles began to appear faster now, new ones, not from statues, but from the earth itself. In places where offerings had been buried, cracks formed, and inside those cracks, curved lines, like lips. Sometimes they bled, sometimes they whispered, and sometimes they laughed. One night, Nietzsche followed the sound. It came not from the altar, not from the circle of statues, but from the base of the largest banyan tree behind the temple, where the roots had been exposed by rain and time. There, in the soft red clay, was a face, half-formed, like a sculpture abandoned before completion. The eyes were closed, the nose crooked, but the mouth? The mouth grinned wide, teeth pressed against the surface of the earth, not buried, but blooming like bone-colored flowers erupting from the mud. She froze, and it smiled wider. A voice, not hers, whispered from somewhere too close, "He's still hungry." The next day, Procombe showed her a scroll, old, fragile, bound in black twine and sealed with hardened wax. He didn't open it. "This is the original rite, the one that called them first, before the temple, before this land had a name. Who wrote it? No one living remembers. Then how do you know it works?" He looked at her, eyes like dry riverbeds. "Because something keeps answering." She wanted to open it, to read the symbols, to understand why the soil smiled, why the dead returned. But Procombe warned her, rituals don't just speak to spirits, they feed them. Feed them what? Memory, grief, blood, hope. What do they do with it? They chew it. That evening the air was heavy. The forest stilled. The insects held a breath. Nietzsche sat by the altar, She had nothing new to offer. No rice, no coins, no teeth. So she gave it a story. She told the soil about the first time she and Anand had argued over fish sauce and whether it was too salty. How she had thrown the bowl across the floor and then spent the entire night remaking the dish, only for him to say, "It still tastes like you." She smiled, and the soil smiled back. She didn't see it, but she felt it. A warmth beneath her spine, a curl in her gut, a grin from the inside out. At midnight, the boy returned, the one with the banana leaf bundle. He stood in the doorway, silent. Then he spoke, the first words she'd heard from him. "She came to me," he whispered. "Who?" Nietzsche asked, though she already knew. "My Jam. She stood at my window. She smiled, but her mouth wasn't right." His eyes trembled. She didn't blink, and when she tried to say my name, her tongue was gone. Nietzsche called for Prakom, but the monk was gone. His quarters sat empty, his robe folded neatly by the window. On his sleeping mat, a bowl of rice, a tooth, and the black scroll, now unsealed, its pages open, ink fresh and wet. And beneath it all, a line in the clay floor, drawn in a perfect curve. A smile, still growing. It began with a breath, not hers, not the wind, something deeper, as though the temple floor had lungs of its own, inhaling slowly, exhaling through the cracks in the walls, through the mouths of the statues, through the bowl that always emptied before dawn. Nietzsche noticed it first in her sleep. At night, when all was still and her thoughts softened into memory, she would wake, not from nightmares, but from sensation. The air pressed against her face, warm, rhythmic, like a mouth exhaling just beside her cheek. And then the smell would come. Earth, rot, the faint copper of wet iron. She would open her eyes, and the shadows would hold their breath. When she confronted the soil directly, she did not expect an answer, but it gave her one. The breath again, slow, wet, steady, coming not from beneath her, but from around her, as if the entire temple was alive, as if the red clay, soaked through with grief, had grown a mouth that waited. She whispered a question. "Why do you smile?" The breath paused, and then came faster. 2, 3 inhales. Excited. Hungry. The smile on the wall, barely a crack in the plaster, widened without sound. Tiny flecks of white shimmered within it. She leaned in. Teeth. Prakom did not return. For days his room remained untouched. No footprints, no trace of where he'd gone, only the unsealed scroll and the bowl with the rice gone cold. Nietzsche read the first line of the scroll, just one. "Do not feed it twice." She touched the ink. It bled onto her fingers, warm, as if freshly written. That night she did not sleep. Instead, she lit the incense. She burned the mango leaves, and she waited at the altar. When the shadows stirred, she did not run. She whispered his name. Anand. The breath behind her grew heavier. She turned and saw him. He stood in the doorway, not like a ghost, not like a man. He was wet. Water soaked his shirt, Mud streaked across his neck, his mouth hung open, the corners twitching. His eyes blinked once, then froze. She stepped forward. "You came back." No answer. He did not move, just breathed, not through his mouth, but from his skin, each pore exhaling a vapor too thick to be missed. His fingers curled unnaturally, twitching like the limbs of a dying animal. She reached for his face, but her fingers passed through. And in that moment, that terrible silent instant, she understood. This was not her husband. It wore him, but it was not him. In the morning, the villagers stopped coming. No more offerings, no more footprints on the path, no more names whispered at the gate. She walked to the edge of the forest and saw why. The boy, the one who brought the first bundle, was standing in the rice field, alone, smiling. His mouth was full of clay, not just stained, filled, packed behind his teeth, dripping from the corners of his lips. He didn't blink. His jaw trembled as though holding something back, and in his hand, clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white, was a strip of flesh. Not his, not human, just meat, pale, pulled from the earth. She turned and fled. Back in the temple, she tore the scroll open completely. She read everything. The words were ancient, not Thai, not Pali, not any script she had ever learned, but she understood them. Not in the mind, but in the blood. Each phrase felt like a blade drawn across her memory. The symbols writhed when looked at too long, shifting between meanings, but one passage remained still. She traced it with her finger, mouthing each syllable aloud, and the walls began to breathe. In, out, in, out. The floor swelled beneath her knees, the altar cracked, the bowl shattered, the temple moaned. Later she stood beneath the banyan tree, the one with the face in the roots. It had grown. The face was no longer half-formed. Now it bore cheeks, a chin, even dimples carved into its clay skin. The eyes were still closed, but the smile had widened. Too wide. Nietzsche whispered, "Are you the one who answers?" The tree shivered. A thin trickle of sap bled from the mouth of the clay face. Not clear sap, red, sticky. She reached toward it, and the tree breathed in. A gust of hot, rotting air hit her chest like a cough. She staggered backward. And then from the soil beside the tree, a small object emerged, pushed upward by unseen fingers. She knelt and picked it up. A molar. Human. Smooth. Still warm. That evening she lit candles around the clearing. She placed offerings in front of each statue. Rice, dried fish, blood from her thumb. She whispered every name she remembered from the village, one by one. Each name caused a statue to tremble, a smile to widen, a breath to exhale from the earth. The entire clearing became a lung, a throat, a choir of buried voices rising in silence. And in the center, Nietzsche knelt, the last one left to remember, the last one left to feed them. Back in the temple, she wrote her husband's name into the clay with her fingernail. The letters shimmered, then cracked, then dissolved into the floor, and behind her, he appeared again, closer this time.
She turned to face him. His eyes bled. His mouth opened wider than before, and inside there was no tongue, only soil, wet, packed, pulsing. He stepped forward and whispered her name, but it came out wrong, not like a word, but like a sob forced through dirt. She fell to her knees and smiled, not from joy, but from terror, because she knew what came next. The floor split beneath the altar. The crack widened like a mouth, and from it came teeth, not falling, not scattered, but growing, erupting from the ground like bone flowers, arranged in rows, all biting down on nothing. Nietzsche screamed. The sound was swallowed instantly. The breath became deafening. Then, silence. And from the darkness beneath the floor, she heard one final whisper. You fed him twice.
The scroll bled. That was the first thing Nietzsche noticed. Not ink, not water, but something alive. A slow seep of dark red along the bottom edge, as though the words themselves were carved from wounds. She had left it folded for days after Frockholm vanished, fearing the truth inside. But now, with the soil breathing louder and the temple's silence thinning into whispers, she could no longer ignore it. She unfolded it fully, fingers trembling. The parchment was old, but the words moved like they were being written in real time, every symbol twitching slightly, like maggots rearranging themselves into a new pattern of meaning. She forced her eyes to stay open. The first line was simple. To speak to the soil, you must feed it something that once spoke. Bone, teeth, tongue, names. It wasn't metaphor. It was instruction. Nietzsche read the next lines aloud, her voice catching on syllables that tasted wrong in the mouth, like ash or iron or rot. To wake the smile, give memory. To hold it open, give blood. To be seen, offer grief. To be touched, offer what you cannot reclaim. The scroll pulsed. She dropped it. The ink slithered for a moment before stilling. That night, she sat by the altar and unwrapped the scarf she kept hidden in the folds of her robe, the one Anand had once used to wipe her tears the night they buried their stillborn child. She hadn't looked at it since. It still held the faint stain of milk and old grief. She placed it gently into the bowl, stepped back, waited. Nothing moved. No breath, no whisper. Only the sound of the cicadas outside. She nearly turned away until the cloth sank, slowly, silently, as if swallowed by an invisible mouth. The bowl remained, but the scarf was gone. And in its place, a small gray tooth. Too small for an adult, too smooth for decay. It pulsed once in the candlelight, then stilled. The next morning she found something had changed. The statues around the temple, the ones with fixed smiles, now had fingernails, real ones, tucked into their palms, dozens, some clean, some split, some still red at the base. She did not touch them. She didn't have to. The offering had been accepted. The ritual had begun. Later that day, she heard a voice at the edge of the forest, soft, barely audible, calling her name. Nietzsche. She stepped outside, hands clenched. A figure stood just beyond the trees. A woman, dressed in pale cloth, her hair hanging like wet rope across her shoulders. Her mouth didn't move when she spoke. Her eyes didn't blink,
but the voice came anyway. It hurts to be forgotten. Nietzsche stepped closer. "Who are you?" The woman tilted her head, revealing a gaping crack along her neck, not bleeding, but leaking earth. From the soil inside her wound, a single word emerged. "Daughter." Then she vanished. That night, Nietzsche could not sit still. She moved from room to room, lighting candles, whispering prayers she hadn't said since she was a child. But the temple no longer accepted prayer. It wanted ritual. She returned to the scroll, flipped to the next section. To see clearly through the veil, give it the part of you that looked away. She didn't understand, not at first, but her hand moved on its own. And before she realized what she was doing, she had retrieved a mirror from the shelf, the one Anand had used to shave each morning, and held it to her own face. Then she closed her left eye and remembered. The moment she turned away from her child's body, the moment she refused to look at what had come from her, too small, too still, too late, she wept, and the mirror cracked. In its reflection for just a second, she saw the child again, but this time it was smiling. The statues began to change, not all at once, not violently, but gradually, like clay softening under breath. Their mouths widened, their hands turned upward. Their eyes, once closed, now opened, one by one, not with eyeballs, but with blackness, smooth, circular pits of shadow, as if the statues no longer remembered being stone, only hunger. She told herself she could stop, that the ritual could be reversed, that the breathing would slow again, the teeth would disappear, the soil would forget. But the scroll said otherwise. To feed once is longing. To feed twice is defiance. To feed 3 times is to be claimed. She had already fed it 3 times, and still she could not stop. She began to dig. Behind the temple, where the roots of the banyan curled into the earth like claws, she found soft patches of soil that resisted her hand, not because they were hard, but because they were full. She unearthed the first pit by accident. Her fingers brushed something smooth, round. She pulled it free. A skull, small, child-sized, the jaw missing, the teeth cracked. Inside the cavity, a rice bowl, still full, still warm. She dropped it and fell back, gasping. The air around her exhaled, and beneath her knees she felt movement, as if hundreds of unseen mouths smiled beneath her. She returned to the temple, covered in mud. The scroll lay open, and on it, now inked in red, a new line had appeared. The soil remembers you now.
The scroll was no longer parchment. It pulsed. Each page throbbed like skin stretched over a heartbeat, warm beneath her fingertips, damp at the edges. The ink had sunk deep, becoming veins. The words no longer needed to be read. They spoke from within. She had passed the threshold. She had been claimed. But she hadn't performed the full ritual. Not yet. That would come tonight. And once it did, Anand would return. But not as a dream, not as a shadow, not as something half-formed in clay and breath. No, this time he would be whole. Nietzsche prepared the offerings as the scroll instructed. A bowl of jasmine rice soaked in river water, a strand of her own hair, a drop of blood from her tongue, the mouth that called him, And the tooth, the small gray one, the one the soil had returned. She placed them in the center of the circle, the clearing surrounded by statues that now stared openly, their smiles wider than ever, their eyes weeping thin streams of clay. Each one seemed to lean forward, just slightly, toward the center, toward her. At sunset, she began. She stepped barefoot into the center of the clearing. The earth pulsed beneath her. Once, twice, a rhythm, a heartbeat. Her voice shook as she spoke the invocation. From soil to soul, from breath to bone, return through the mouth that mourns you. I offer memory, I offer love, I offer what remains. The wind died. The leaves stopped rustling. The world stopped. Even the light held its breath. Then, from beneath the offerings, the soil began to split. A hairline fracture that grew with each breath she took. It widened into a mouth, an open, grinning maw in the clay, lined with teeth. Not bones, living teeth. Pearly, wet, gnashing without sound. And from that mouth, steam rose. It smelled like wet cloth, old blood, and river water. Then came the breath, stronger than ever before. It struck her chest like a drumbeat. She staggered back. The statues around her began to hum, not with sound, but with vibration. Their grins vibrating like taut strings, their eyes darkening with every second. And from the clay, he emerged, Anan, or what once wore his name. He rose slowly, inch by inch, pulled upward by invisible threads. His head appeared first, eyes shut, mouth slack, then shoulders, then arms. His body shimmered with wetness, as if reborn from a womb of soil. His feet never touched the earth. They hovered inches above it, trailing clumps of red clay and broken roots. Nietzsche gasped, "Anan!" His eyes snapped open, but they were empty, hollow, not black, just absent, as though whatever was behind them had no need for sight. He tilted his head, smiled. The smile was too wide, too many teeth, and some were not his. She stepped forward. "I've missed you," she whispered. The figure didn't respond, but its mouth opened, and something spoke through it. Not in Thai, not in words, just a sound, low and crawling, like fingernails dragged through mud. She covered her ears. It seeped through anyway. Her nose bled, her eyes watered, and the statues around the clearing all turned their heads toward her, in perfect, unnatural unison. Anand's body moved, not walked, floated, drifted forward like smoke bound to skin. He reached out a hand, fingers long, dirty, twisting at the joints. He touched her cheek. His palm was ice. She closed her eyes and leaned into it. For a moment, just one, she believed. But then she felt it. The smile, stretching across her own face, not hers, not voluntary. Her lips pulled back, her jaw trembled. A grin forced itself into place, too wide, too stiff, too unnatural. And from deep in her throat, a noise gurgled upward. A laugh, but not hers. A laugh that sounded like dirt choking on air. She tore herself away, collapsed to the ground. The figure hovered above her, still smiling, still silent. The statues around the clearing began to laugh, quietly,
clicking sounds like bone on bone. She crawled backward, blood in her teeth, the smile still etched on her face like a scar. And Anan spoke again, this time in words. 2 words. Feed me. Then he vanished, into dust, into soil, into breath. The smile didn't leave her face until morning. She sat at the altar, lips cracked, cheeks trembling, eyes wide, grinning like a corpse in rigor mortis. When it finally faded, she wept, not from fear, but from understanding, because what returned to her wasn't Anan. It never was. It was the soil's memory of him, wearing his voice, wearing his scent, wearing the echo of his love. But it had no soul, only hunger. She read the scroll again. This time the words were crueler, sharper. A new line had appeared. He has eaten from your hand. He will return again, but never with less hunger. Nietzsche stepped out into the clearing. The statues no longer smiled. They grinned, wide, horrid, full of something that knew her now. She saw movement beneath the earth, small undulations in the dirt, like something crawling just beneath the surface, waiting, stretching, learning her scent. And in the wind, barely audible, a chant circled her like flies. Feed me again, feed me again, feed me again. The village changed overnight. It began with the dogs. They stopped barking. They no longer ran to the temple gate or chased chickens in the alleyways. They simply lay in silence, eyes open, chests rising slowly, as if listening for something underground. Then the children began to speak in their sleep, garbled words, cracked syllables. One mother heard her daughter whisper the name of her long-dead grandfather, a name the girl had never been taught. Another child woke with soil beneath her fingernails and teeth that didn't belong in her mouth, one too many, crooked and gray. The villagers said nothing aloud, but their eyes turned toward the hills, toward the temple, toward her. Nietzsche tried to stay away from the clearing, but the soil called her, not with voice, not with dream, but with gravity. Her body ached if she resisted. Her chest tightened. Her teeth hurt. So she returned. Each time she approached, she found new things waiting. A cracked bowl full of hair. A fingernail curled like a shell. A smear of blood across the mouth of one statue. The statues had changed again. They no longer just smiled. Now they wept. Not tears, but clay. Thin streaks running from the corners of their eyes down to their mouths, as if the smiles had become too heavy to bear. One statue near the center had split at the jaw, its grin too wide to hold shape. Inside the crack, tiny white nubs, teeth, growing inward. She walked through the village in daylight. The air was tense. The silence was wrong. People did not greet her. They did not speak, but they watched. One old woman spat as Nietzsche passed, crossing herself with trembling fingers. Another man left a fish's head on her path, still dripping, still warm. A warning or an offering. She couldn't tell. She visited the home of the boy who had first come to the temple. The house was empty. No furniture, no smell, no sound.
Only a single handprint smeared on the far wall in dried clay, too high for a child to reach. It faced downward. Back at the temple, she found the scroll torn, not by accident. The edges were ripped as though by hands, human or otherwise. Some pages were missing, but new ones had appeared, written in a different ink, darker, wetter, and in the margins drawings, smiling faces without eyes, mouths opening like blooming flowers, roots coiling around bones. One line caught her breath. When they come back, they do not leave. She remembered Anand's face, the wrongness behind it, the way his smile lingered long after he vanished. And she understood. She had not released him. She had invited him. That night, something knocked on the temple door. Once, twice, 3 times. She opened it. No one stood there, only footprints, leading out from the inside. She turned around and froze. All the candles were out. The scroll was gone, and from the back of the temple a sound echoed, scraping, like something dragging its nails through clay. Then laughter, high, broken, wrong. She ran, but the sound followed, not from behind, from below. The floor of the altar room sagged, breathed, cracked. A smile opened near the edge, small, shallow, but growing. As she stared, another appeared beside it, then a third, until the floor was filled with mouths, all grinning silently, all waiting. She fell to her knees. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, and the answer came in breath. Everything. The next morning, she buried the rice bowl. She swore to stop the rituals. She poured salt across the altar, whispered prayers, sealed the temple door with ash. And for a moment, just one, the wind felt clean. The silence felt safe. She sat in the sun for the first time in weeks, breathed deeply, almost smiled. Then the bells rang in the village. The old temple bell, unused for years, began to toll on its own, slow, hollow, rhythmic. Nietzsche ran down the hill, across the dry stream, into the village square. A crowd had gathered. She pushed her way forward and stopped. At the center, a girl knelt in the dirt. Young, maybe 7. She was laughing with her mouth wide open and her tongue gone. Her teeth had doubled in size, her lips torn at the corners from the strain, and in her lap, a rice bowl, still warm. Steam rose from it. No one had seen who placed it there, but Nietzsche knew. That night, she heard Anand again. He did not speak this time. He only stood at the edge of the clearing, smiling, his mouth full of soil. And beside him others emerged, dozens, villagers who had died years ago, a teacher who drowned, a merchant struck by lightning, an old man who vanished during harvest. All of them smiling, all of them silent, all of them waiting. And she realized the truth. It wasn't just a ritual. It was a door, and she had left it wide open. It had been 14 days since Prakam vanished. 14 nights of teeth blooming in the soil. 14 mornings of clay creeping farther into the temple floor. 14 silent meals where she could no longer tell if she ate or if something else did through her hands. Nietzsche thought he had abandoned her, but Prakham was never meant to leave. He was meant to return. And one evening, just before the rain, he did. She heard the chime first, the faint ring of the prayer bell tied to his staff, a soft, hollow sound that drifted through the trees like wind-borne sorrow. She stepped into the courtyard and saw him standing at the edge of the banyan clearing. His robes were torn, his skin was cracked, caked in red clay, flaking from the neck down. But his eyes were clear and wide, too wide, as if he had seen something in the dark and had yet to blink since. "I told you not to feed it twice," he said, voice like sand sliding across stone. "I only wanted to see him," she replied. He nodded slowly, as if that explained everything. "And now you see them all." He sat beneath the temple's gate as the clouds gathered. Rain tapped gently against the roof, then harder, turning into a chorus of whispers. Nietzsche knelt beside him. "Is there a way to end it?" she asked. "Endings are for the living," Prakham murmured. "Then what do I do?" He looked at her, really looked, past her eyes, past her flesh. "You prepare for the chant." "What chant?" "The last one." He rose and moved to the altar, his hands shaking. From the folds of his robe, he pulled out a small lacquered box wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it slowly, like unsealing a wound, and inside was an old takrut, a scroll of sacred script rolled tightly in brass, bound with twine and oil. "This was never meant to be read aloud," he said. "But some doors can't be locked once opened, only redirected." "What happens if we use it?" she asked. "We don't," he said. "I do." He began to chant, low, deliberate, a melody that didn't belong to any world she knew. The syllables twisted as they left his mouth, sounding ancient, not in time, but in weight. And as he spoke, the temple trembled. Dust rose from the floor. The walls bled clay. The air became thick, like breathing through soaked cloth. The mouths in the floor began to open, not all at once, one, then another, then 20. Grinning, waiting, clicking their teeth in rhythm to the chant. Nietzsche backed away, hands over her ears. The sound hurt, not her body, her memory. Every time the monk chanted a new line, a piece of her past shifted. Moments she thought she remembered now played differently. Anand no longer smiling in their wedding photo. Her mother's face during childbirth, blank instead of pained. The morning she buried her unborn child, she had done it alone. Hadn't she? The chant was rearranging things, not undoing, unmaking. The monk's voice cracked. Blood ran from his nose, his eyes rolled upward, but he continued. Faster now, harder. The scroll in his hands glowed, dimly at first, then pulsing red. The teeth in the floor began to chatter, and the wind howled like it was being devoured. Then the ground opened. Not a crack, not a pit, a mouth, the largest yet. It split the temple floor from altar to wall, lined with blackened teeth, gums slick with soil and blood. And from it a hand reached out, human, wet, bone-thin, followed by a second, then a face. Not Anand, not anyone she recognized, just a man with no eyes, no skin on his lips, just smiling muscle. The monk faltered. "Don't let it sing," he whispered. Then the mouth in the earth spoke. The voice that emerged was not sound, it was pressure. It slammed into her chest like drowning. Words crawled into her ears and bloomed behind her eyes. She screamed. The monk dropped the scroll. Clay hands erupted from the cracks, grabbing at his ankles, his robes, his throat. Still he chanted, even as they dragged him down, even as his knees vanished into the earth, even as the clay filled his mouth and pulled the last word from his throat. Close. Then silence. He was gone. Only his staff remained, and the mouths closed all at once, as if satisfied. The scroll turned to ash, the mouths sealed, and for the first time in weeks, the air was still. No whispers, no breath, no teeth, just silence. Nietzsche knelt at the altar, tears mixing with the clay on her cheeks. "You tried to stop it," she whispered. But as she looked down, she saw something in the place where Prakam had vanished. Not bone, not cloth. A smile, pressed into the earth like a seal, still fresh, still moving. She staggered outside. The sky had turned pale gray. The rain had stopped. The statues in the clearing were all facing away now, turned toward the forest, toward the village, toward home. And their smiles were growing again. The earth remembered. Even after the monk was swallowed, even after the chant stopped, even after the mouths closed and the floor fell still, the soil did not forget. Nietzsche felt it pulsing beneath her feet, a heartbeat slower than time, louder than thought. It didn't speak now. It didn't need to, because it had fed, and now it was digesting. The villagers had grown quieter, but their silence was different now. Not cautious, not fearful, expectant. They moved slowly through the fields, barefooted, heads tilted. They stared into empty corners, smiled without cause. Children sat in the dirt, tracing circles into the clay, mouths twitching at the corners. And always, always, there were bowls, set on porches, hung from trees, half buried in gardens, some filled with rice, some with hair. One held a tongue, pressed flat like a flower, drying in the sun. No one questioned it, not even the dogs anymore. Nietzsche knew it was her fault. She had opened the door. She had whispered the name. And now the whole village was listening to something else. But the scroll was gone. The monk was gone. And the mouths had gone quiet. So she did the only thing left to do. She began to dig. The first pit she opened was behind the temple, a shallow patch of red clay beneath an old Bodhi tree. She'd seen movement there for days, hints, hums, breaths beneath the roots. With her bare hands she scooped at the earth, clay caked under her nails, her fingers cracked from the dryness, but she didn't stop. She dug until her palms struck something hard, smooth, curved. She brushed the soil away. A skull. Its jaw was dislocated, the sockets wide, and between its clenched teeth, a piece of folded parchment, still intact. She took it, opened it, A name. Not hers, not Anand's. Prajareen. She didn't recognize it, but the earth did. The wind shifted, the breath returned. The next day, she dug another pit, and another, each one unearthed the same: a body, a bowl, and the smile. Some faces had been carved into the skulls with knives. Some wore clay masks molded into permanent grins. One still had its hands folded in prayer, but its mouth was packed with rice and broken fingernails. Each was buried facing upward, toward the temple, toward her. And each carried a name in its mouth, as if the soil itself was keeping records. By the fourth pit, she found something new: a rib cage, tied with rope, a stone placed in its chest cavity, a red thread looped 3 times around the sternum, a sealing ritual, broken. The bones were loose, the rope frayed, the stone cracked, and beneath it, teeth, dozens of them, far more than one body could hold. She gathered them in her skirt and carried them to the altar. She didn't know why, but her hands moved without thought. She placed them gently into the bowl, and as she did, the floor breathed again, just once. That night, the temple spoke, not in voice, but in memory. Nietzsche dreamed of a different woman, younger, wearing the same robes she had seen in old paintings, hair tied with sacred thread, digging in the same clay, chanting, weeping, then screaming. The earth opened and swallowed her whole. Nietzsche woke with her own hands clenched around her throat. The dirt beneath her fingernails was not the same color as the temple clay, darker, fresher. She had dreamed someone else's death and brought its soil back with her. She returned to the clearing the next morning. The statues were gone, not broken, not crumbled, gone. Only indentations remained where their knees had rested, and faint smudges where their mouths had kissed the air. The center of the circle was deeper now. A perfect spiral had been carved into the ground, by what tool she could not imagine. It pulsed when she stepped near. A voice rose with it, not loud, not clear, just breath, shaped like a question. Will you finish what they began? She found a final pit, half buried beneath a shrine stone at the farthest edge of the forest. The shrine was cracked, the prayers etched into it long faded, moss covered its roof. Inside, a single idol of a smiling woman, face worn smooth by time. She moved the statue aside, and beneath it, the final bowl. This one was different. Not clay, stone, polished black, heavy, uncracked. She lifted it, and underneath, carved into the stone itself, the first one fed. No bones, no teeth, just a reflection in the curve of the stone, her own face, smiling wider than she was. She dropped the bowl. It didn't break. It sank into the soil, as if it belonged there, and the ground smiled. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat on the temple steps, watching the forest sway under no wind, and when she blinked, she saw them, figures between the trees,
watching, smiling, dozens, hundreds, and at the center, one taller than the rest. Anan, no longer dripping, no longer twitching. Now he was whole, but his smile, it was carved into his face now. His cheeks split at the edges, and when he opened his mouth, she saw no tongue, only more smiles, layered, endless, grinning into grinning into grinning. Nietzsche whispered, "I won't feed you again." And the forest answered, "You already did."
The forest no longer slept. It waited. Every night now, Nietzsche could feel its breath pressing against the edges of the temple, hot, damp, and pulsing with hunger. The trees leaned inward. The earth around the building rose slightly, as if swelling with something just beneath the surface. Even the air had changed. It was heavier, like it had been chewed and spat back out. She stopped eating, not out of fear, but because she wasn't alone at the table anymore. Each time she sat before her bowl, the rice would vanish by the third mouthful, not in large bites, not messily, but as if someone else were swallowing at the same pace, sharing the meal, matching her, mimicking her, until she froze with the spoon near her lips and a second hand, unseen, did the same. She threw the bowl across the room. It shattered. The rice hissed on the floor, steaming even though it had cooled hours ago. A shape flickered in the corner, gone before she could turn. She pressed her back against the wall, breathing hard. Outside, the wind called her name, gently, almost kindly. But underneath, something laughed. The clearing was no longer a place for prayer. It had become a mouth. The spiral carved into the dirt now spun wider, fresh lines added, deeper grooves dug by invisible hands. The center had collapsed slightly, forming a shallow basin, the shape of a hollow tongue. Nietzsche didn't approach it at first, but the whispers grew louder with every night she resisted. They didn't scream, they didn't threaten, they invited. Just one more offering, just one more memory, one more bite. She told herself she wouldn't do it, not again. But when the sky turned black in the middle of the afternoon, when the birds dropped from the trees in silence, their beaks filled with clay, she knew. The temple had already decided. This wasn't a choice, it was a continuation. She prepared the final offering. This time, it wasn't rice. It wasn't hair or blood or bone. It was her voice. She sat cross-legged at the center of the clearing and whispered every memory of Anan she could recall. His laugh, warm like sunlight on old wood. The way he used to whistle while cooking. The scar above his knee from falling off a bike at 12. The way he said her name on the morning after the miscarriage, not as a word, but a vow. She whispered until her throat ached, until her lips cracked, until her memories grew thin, and when she finally stopped, the air shuddered, as if sighing in satisfaction. Then the earth opened, but not like before. No mouth, no crack, just surrender. The soil peeled itself back like skin, forming a cradle of roots and red clay, and inside it, he stood, Anan, fully formed, dry, dressed in the same clothes he wore the day he died, but his face was too calm. No confusion, no pain, just understanding and hunger. He stepped forward. Nietzsche backed away. "You're not him," she whispered. He said nothing, but his smile twitched, not cruelly, not kindly, just patiently.
as if he had all the time in the world to wait for her to realize what she had done. He held out his hand. She stared at it. His fingers were clean, his nails perfect, but there was no warmth in them, no temble. She reached, slowly, shaking, and touched his palm, and it sank into clay. His entire hand dissolved like wet sand, slipping over her skin, gripping her fingers even as it collapsed into them. She screamed and tore herself back, stumbling into the spiral. The earth below shifted. The spiral pulsed, and anon, what remained of him laughed. But not through his mouth, through hers. Her lips curled on their own, her throat convulsed. A sound burst free that didn't belong to her, deep, masculine, and wrong. She dropped to the ground, and the clay reached for her ankles. From the center of the spiral, dozens of hands erupted. They were human, but not. Skinless, some charred, some old, some with jewelry still clinging to the bones. They didn't grab her. They offered themselves, palms up, reaching, inviting. "Feed us," they whispered in unison. "We remember what you gave. You are the last course." And Nietzsche cried out, "I didn't mean to open it. I didn't mean to wake you." But the wind answered, "You meant to remember, and that is enough." The clearing darkened, not from shadow, but from mouths. Thousands of them, pressed into the earth, into the trees, into the undersides of leaves, smiling, smiling, smiling. And the spiral began to turn, not visibly, not physically, but in her mind. Everything tilted, time stretched. She fell forward into the spiral, into her memory, into Anand's arms and mouth and teeth and voice and loss. And then silence. When she woke, the forest was still. Her hands were clean, no blood, no clay. The spiral was gone. The clearing was just dirt again, untouched, unmarked. The statues had not returned. The altar was whole, and on its stone surface sat a single offering, bowl empty, save for one last thing: a smile, pressed gently into the inside curve of the bowl. Not carved, not painted, but just formed, as if the bowl remembered her face. She stepped away. Her legs shook, but she walked. Down the temple stairs, across the grass, past the banyan tree. And behind her, she heard one final whisper. Low, gentle, almost fond. We are full now.
Nietzsche didn't speak of what happened in the clearing. She didn't need to. The village already knew. Not because someone told them, not because they saw her fall into the spiral, but because they had felt it, like a sudden shift in air pressure, like the moment just before a storm breaks open, and because the smiles had begun to spread. It started in the well, the one near the edge of the rice fields, untouched for years. One morning, a farmer went to draw water and found the rope coiled around a jawbone, human, teeth still intact. The bucket never came back up. only the bone. Clean, smiling. Then it spread to the market. A woman selling dried fish began to hum a tune no one recognized. She said it came to her in a dream, a lullaby her grandmother used to sing. But her grandmother had died without children. The song had no words, just breath, rhythmic, slow. Each note dragged like a foot in wet clay. People began to join in, without knowing why, without knowing how. Soon after, a young man was found standing in the center of his home, motionless, eyes wide, mouth open. He had removed all his teeth, one by one, placed each one on the floor in the shape of a spiral. There was no blood, only the smile etched into the wood beside the pile. The smiles became a contagion, not just of the face, of the soul. They spread from lips to hands to memories. People started to forget. At first, it was small things, a name, a birthday, what day it was. Then it became heavier. A mother forgot her son had died 10 years ago. A teacher forgot how to write. One man stood for 6 hours in front of a tree, waiting for it to speak his name. And always, when they forgot, they smiled. Nietzsche watched it unfold in silence. She no longer tried to warn them. She no longer prayed. She only listened, because the temple had grown quiet again, and that silence was worse than the whispers. It meant the mouths had moved elsewhere. One night, she passed by her neighbor's home and saw something she would never unsee. The entire family, mother, father, 2 daughters, sat in a circle on the dirt floor, not talking, not eating, just smiling at each other. Their mouths had been sewn shut with thin strands of their own hair. In the center of their circle sat a bowl, empty. But every few moments, one of them would lift an invisible spoon and pretend to feed another. They mimed chewing, swallowed nothing, and nodded, satisfied, like they were full. Nietzsche ran. She ran to the temple, to the only place where the smiles had started, where the soil had spoken. But when she arrived, she found the doors open and the air dead. The temple was hollow now. The altar cracked again, but the mouths were gone. No grins in the floor, no breath in the walls. Only the scroll, reassembled, perfectly rolled, clean, as if waiting for the next reader. She touched it, and in her mind, she heard the forest whisper, "It's already in them." The next day, a little girl followed her. 7, maybe 8, eyes too wide, smile too still. She didn't speak, just stood at the gate of the temple and waited. When Nietzsche stepped outside, the girl held out a tooth. Not her own. It was too large, too yellow. She placed it in her palm and walked away without a word. No footsteps, no sound. Nietzsche turned the tooth over. One side had a mark, a groove, like something had gnaw on it. She dropped it, and from behind her, the wind whispered, "She's already fed." The village held a feast the next evening. No one knew who organized it, but by sunset,
Every household had brought something to the square. Bowls of food, folded cloth, old family photos, small teeth arranged in floral patterns. They ate in silence. No laughter, no toasts, no music. Only chewing. Even when there was nothing on their plates, they chewed. Some bled from the corners of their mouths. None of them noticed. They just smiled. Nietzsche stood at the edge of the gathering, unseen, uninvited. And then, one by one, the villagers turned to face her. Every single one. Their heads tilted at the same angle. Their mouths grinned in the same curve. And from dozens of throats, a single whisper escaped. "Will you serve the next course?" She ran again, back to the temple, to the clearing, to the spiral. But it was gone, replaced now by a mirror-flat patch of earth. Nothing moved, until she stepped forward and her foot sank into the soil. Soft, warm, breathing. From beneath, she felt something shift, then rise. She stepped back. A new spiral etched itself in front of her, drawn in real time by invisible fingers. And at the center, a bowl, black, polished, empty, waiting. She didn't touch it, but her hands moved anyway. She reached down, lifted it, and for a moment, everything stilled. The trees, the air, her breath. Then the grin returned, not on her face, not on the soil, inside her. She felt it stretch through her bones, a widening that cracked her jaw, curled her spine, bent her thoughts. And behind her, the village began to walk, one by one, in single file, mouths open, hands empty, hearts full of nothing. The feast had not ended. It had just begun. Nietzsche no longer slept, not in any way that gave her rest. Her dreams had become corridors, long, narrow, winding through walls made of teeth. She would walk for hours in silence, barefoot on soft clay, until she reached a door made entirely of mouths, some smiling, some whispering, some gnawing at each other in a slow, eternal hunger. When she opened that door, she would wake, gasping, sweating, and always with the taste of soil in her mouth. One morning, she coughed blood into her palm. Only it wasn't blood. It was clay, wet, red, full of grit. She staggered to the temple well and vomited over the edge. More clay. Then something hard. She reached into her mouth, trembling, fingers brushing something loose. She pulled. A tooth, but not hers. Too large, yellowed, still warm. Beneath her tongue, she felt more. Dozens of them, lining the inside of her mouth like a second set, smiling when she didn't. She collapsed to her knees in the garden. The villagers had left small offerings outside the temple overnight. Bowls, bones, finger joints wrapped in silk. She hadn't seen them arrive, but they had been there when she stepped outside, neatly arranged like a prayer written in meat. She looked down at her own hands. They were no longer hers.
The skin had become dry, beginning to crack at the knuckles. Her nails looked too long. Her palms were stained with a color that didn't wash off. She remembered feeding the soil, but she couldn't remember how many times. She wasn't sure if she had stopped or if she ever started at all. In the temple, the air hummed, not with chanting, with chewing. She followed the sound to the altar. The black bowl was still there, untouched, but beside it, something new had grown. A mirror, rough, shaped from polished clay, its frame lined with tiny teeth, baby teeth, perfectly arranged in a circle. She looked into it and didn't recognize the face staring back. Her skin was too pale. Her lips cracked into a smile she hadn't made, and when she opened her mouth, rows of teeth stared back, layered like shark jaws. At the very back of her throat, something moved. She screamed, but even her scream grinned. She ran into the forest, blind, sobbing, vomiting teeth as she fled. The wind whispered all around her, "You're almost ready. We can see you now. The mouth inside you is open." She collapsed beneath the banyan tree, the same place she had first seen the face in the roots. It was still there, but now it looked like her. Eyes closed, mouth wide, and from the corners of the clay lips something oozed. Thick, dark, memory. She saw flashes. Anand kneeling beside her with jasmine in his hands, the monk sweeping the temple steps. The night her child was buried, and she had whispered, "Take her, just let me forget." She had fed the soil before the ritual, before Anand, before Prakum. She had made a trade. She had asked for peace, and the earth had listened. The first smile had begun with her. She crawled back to the spiral. It had grown again, now a full depression in the earth, bowl-shaped, lined with writhing roots and twitching mouths. In its center, the same black bowl, but no longer empty. Now it overflowed with teeth, not random, organized, labeled with names carved in the enamel, some in Thai, some in symbols she no longer recognized, and one bore her own name. She reached in, touched it, and her mouth filled with warmth. Her jaw locked, her spine arched. She screamed, and the forest smiled. She woke at dusk, lying in the spiral, mouth dry, lips cracked, and one thought repeated in her mind. They're no longer asking to be fed, they're asking to be born. She walked to the village, not to warn, not to flee, but to see. And what she saw made her fall to her knees. They were already gone. Not dead, replaced, hollowed out and packed with clay, moving in perfect rhythm, eating nothing, speaking only in humming breath. Children played with bones like marbles. A woman gently bathed her husband in a bowl of soil. A man sat before a mirror, brushing his gums with a knife. All of them still, all of them grinning. And in the sky, a new moon rose, not white, red, streaked with something darker, like veins. And as it climbed, the ground vibrated. Nietzsche fell to the ground, gripping the dirt, and she heard it again, from within herself,
From behind her ribs, behind her tongue, a voice, "Let us out." She crawled back to the temple, to the bowl, to the spiral. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She only smiled, and her smile smiled back. The temple no longer had doors. The wood had rotted into the soil, devoured by moisture and time, and what remained were only archways, yawning, open, grinning like sockets in a skull. Nietzsche walked through them without hesitation. She no longer feared what lived inside, because now it lived in her. Her smile no longer faded. It had etched itself into her cheeks like dried riverbeds, splitting skin at the corners, stretching her lips until blood no longer dripped, just darkened, then vanished as if consumed. She did not blink, not often. Her eyes felt dry now, but she did not cry, could not. There was nothing left to mourn, only completion. The black bowl sat on the altar, unchanged, still full of teeth, still warm, still pulsing. But now it breathed in tandem with her chest, rising and falling in a rhythm not hers, but shared. One body, two hungers. And the voice beneath her tongue had grown louder, clearer, male, but not anon. Older, heavier. It spoke only when she was still. "You have served. Now you belong." That morning, a traveler came, not from the village, a real outsider. A merchant, they said, from Lampang. He had heard stories, whispers, curse tales passed between travelers on rainy nights. He did not believe them. He came to see the temple with his own eyes. When he reached the clearing, he found her, kneeling, barefoot, dressed in white, so still she could have been stone. The wind did not move her hair. The light did not reflect in her eyes. She looked at him and smiled. The traveler froze. Something ancient gripped his chest. He stepped back once, then again, and then ran. He did not return to his cart. He did not look back at the village. He fled breathless until the trees no longer grinned, until the wind no longer whispered his name. He would never speak of what he saw, because the memory of her smile rotted in his throat. He would die weeks later, whispering clay prayers in a language no one understood. Inside the temple, Nietzsche stood before the altar. She took the bowl into her hands. Its weight had changed. Now it was heavy with presence, with promise. And she carried it outside to the center of the spiral. There the villagers waited, not as people, as witnesses. Their eyes glazed, their mouths slack, each one of them humming quietly, a sound that wasn't music, a sound that opened things. Nietzsche knelt in the center. She placed the bowl at her feet. Then, without hesitation, she tore her own dress down the middle. Her skin was patterned now, streaked with veins of hardened clay, like vines spreading through stone. Her fingers cracked as she touched her chest. She whispered, "I offer." Then she reached into her own mouth, slowly, and pulled. A tooth, then another, then another. They came free without resistance, as if they didn't belong to her anymore, as if they were never hers. She placed them one by one into the bowl. The earth shook. The villagers swayed in unison, and the spiral began to turn again, gently, slowly, like a wheel of mouths grinding bone into memory. From the forest came a sound. Footsteps. No, roots moving through soil. A figure emerged. Tall, feminine, clay from head to toe. A bride of dirt and blood and forgotten names. She wore a veil made of teeth. She had no eyes, but her smile. It stretched from ear to ear, lips carved back into raw, grinning flesh. She walked to Nietzsche and knelt, mirrored her. Then, together, they opened their mouths, and from both throats the voice spoke in unison. We take the shape of what we're fed. You fed us love. You fed us grief. You fed us memory. And now you will remain. The clay bride reached forward, touched Nietzsche's face. The contact burned. But Nietzsche did not scream. She smiled. And as the clay spread across her cheeks, her skin cracked, flaking away to reveal red clay beneath. Her body stiffened, her breath slowed, and then it stopped. But she did not die. She simply became still. The clay hardened over her legs first, then her arms, then her back. The villagers knelt as one, and a wind swept through the spiral, full of breath and whispers and teeth. By sunrise, she was gone. No bones, no blood, only a statue kneeling at the center of the spiral, mouth open in eternal offering, hands cupped around a black bowl. And beneath the clay, her heart still beat, slowly, once every hour. A reminder that she was not a sacrifice. She was a bride, and the soil had taken her name.
Years passed. The forest reclaimed what remained of the village. Homes collapsed into the earth, vines coiled around empty windows, and roots split open walls with slow, patient hunger. The wind blew through abandoned rice fields like breath across an old flute, soft, sad, unfinished. The paths to the temple grew narrow again, until they vanished completely. But stories, as always, survived, not written, not carved, whispered between strangers in roadside inns, shared beside firelight with voices low and cautious, spoken by children with wide eyes and trembling mouths. They said there was a place up in the hills where the earth smiled, where offerings vanished, where people forgot their names, where the soil watched you back. One day a woman arrived, young, dusty, tired from travel. She had no family, no home, only a photograph folded too many times in her pocket, her sister missing for 5 years. No one believed she was still alive. But the traveler had followed every rumor, every map, every whisper, and they had all pointed to this place, to the temple the land had tried to forget. She found it near dusk, half buried in green and shadow. The stupa collapsed, the steps cracked, the statues crumbled into lichen and silence. But in the center of the old grounds, a spiral, perfect, clean, undisturbed, as if someone swept it daily. And at its center, a figure, kneeling, unmoving, cloaked in red clay and moss, hands cupped around a black bowl. The woman approached slowly, carefully. The air shifted the moment she crossed the edge of the spiral. It became thick, warm, still. The sound of her heartbeat echoed in her ears. She reached the statue, stared into its face. It smiled. Not a crack, not a fissure. A real smile. pressed into clay lips that had once known her name, and in its eyes, hollow, silent, eternal, she saw herself reflected. "Nietzsche," she whispered. No answer, only the wind. Then, a breath, soft, behind her. She turned, no one. But when she looked back, the bowl in the statue's hands was empty. Moments ago it had been filled with dust and broken offerings. Now, clean, waiting, and beside it, a tooth, small, new, still red at the root. The traveler dropped to her knees. Tears ran down her face. She didn't know why. She just knew that her sister hadn't vanished. Not truly. She had been chosen. She had been fed to something and had become part of it. And now, it was hungry again. From the trees, figures emerged, silent, smiling. They moved like mist across the ground, not walking, not floating, just arriving. They surrounded the spiral in a perfect ring and hummed, not a song, a memory, a vibration that curled around her spine and whispered her childhood, her mother's voice, the scent of rain on old wood, the sound of her sister's laughter. Then, it took those things from her, gently, with a grin. The statue moved, just the fingers, just enough. The bowl tipped, the tooth fell into the dirt, and the spiral pulsed once. The traveler didn't scream. She only smiled. It came easily now, like the face remembered before the soul agreed. She reached forward, picked up the tooth, held it to her lips, and the forest exhaled. The clay beneath her knees warmed, softened, breathed. And with a sigh, the traveler whispered, "Let me remember her." And the spiral whispered back, "Let her remember you." At dawn, the clearing was empty. No bowl, no statue, no spiral. Only fresh soil damp with breath, and a new path worn into the trees, waiting for the next one. Because some stories never end. They only smile again.